Broadcasting from the Unshackled Studios in Melbourne. This is WilmsFront, brought to you by the unshackled.net. Now here's Tim Wilms.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another WilmsFront featured interview show. Back on Sunday, it is the 7th of May, 2023. We are broadcasting on the Unshackled YouTube channel, the Tim Wilms D Live channel, and the WilmsFront Odyssey channel. Entropy is live, where you can send through a direct question or super chat to myself or my guest for tonight to support the Unshackled Productions. It is 8:30 p.m. here in Melbourne, Victoria, but tonight we are heading north of the Murray as the 58th New South Wales Parliament will be opening on Tuesday and swearing members of both houses elected at the March 25 election. In the lower house, the Legislative Assembly, new Labor Premier Chris Minns, Governor, is in minority. He, in the end, won only 45 of the 93 seats in the Legislative Council, where 21 members have been elected out of the 42 for 8-year terms. No single party ever wins a majority, as members are elected via statewide proportional representation. One of those newly elected in the Legislative Council is my guest tonight, the Hon John Ruddick MLC, representing the Liberal Democrats. Welcome back to WilmsFront and congratulations on your election.
Good evening, Tim. Very good to see you again. Thanks for having me.
When I first interviewed you back in February 2021, that was, well, when we were in the false sense of COVID zero. We were still discussing how to make the Liberal Party great again, and you concluded in the end that it couldn't be made great again. But you gave the party 25 years of your life, so why did you conclude that it couldn't be made great again?
Okay, well, look, I'm happy to walk you through that, but I'll just quickly say about that book. Despite its name, which was sort of designed to grab attention, it's really a blueprint for how any mass political organisation should be structured. So while yes, I have given hope on the Liberal Party, I'm hoping that, the Labor Party could introduce, any major party could introduce the reforms that I've suggested. Anyway, well, look, I joined the Liberal Party 2 days after John Hewson's Fight Back package lost in 1993. I was what was then known as an economic rationalist. I believed in the Fight Back package. It was about spurring entrepreneurialism, about reducing the size of the government. And I was heavily involved in the Liberals, and the Young Liberals in particular, in the 1990s. And then, I sort of... Between the year 2000 and 2011, I did not attend one Liberal Party meeting. So that was 11 years. I would go to social events, but I was, more than an inactive member. I thought at that time, we had John Howard as the Prime Minister, and I thought that the right wing, the Conservative, whatever you want to call them, were dominating the New South Wales Liberal Party at that time. And I thought, okay, well, that's a good thing. But now what has happened is that the Conservatives, it was really the so-called Conservative faction, which I was so disappointed with in the term of particularly the Morrison government, but also the Turnbull government. And that is that they had really sort of betrayed their founding principles. Now, this came to a head in mid-July 2021, when the country was going into an extended lockdown. And I was, immediately upset when COVID first came along. I was immediately, thinking this is a catastrophe. We are massively overreacting to COVID. And, so then it was the Liberal state and federal governments which were locking us down, or in New South Wales at least. And I thought, well, look, this is absolutely outrageous from the Liberal government, this COVID authoritarianism. Okay, so that was the first point, which there was three things they did, which I thought, look, 3 strikes and you're out, Liberal Party. The second one was the complete capitulation on global warming, which I believe is junk science. And so I thought, they'd won successive elections on trying to sort of not be radical on this subject, to be sort of more level-headed, and particularly the 2019 election, which Scott Morrison won. But then Scott Morrison basically just embraced everything Bill Shorten was campaigning on anyway. Okay, now then the third, and I think we're all, I think the crunch is coming on the energy market. Now then, of course, the state and federal governments, including Liberal governments, got us into enormous public debt at a state and federal level. Now the Howard government was not perfect, but John Howard, after 12 years in power, did leave a Commonwealth debt of $20 billion. Now $20 billion is nothing, in a country's economy as big as Australia. So it was basically zero. And now we're, now look, it is coming down now, which is good. But I mean, it did hit $1 trillion under ScoMo, still an enormous amount of debt. And it actually went up under Abbott, Turnbull, and Morrison. And then it sort of doubled, almost doubled with COVID. So I was thinking, look, we need an alternative. Now, I had heard of the Liberal Democrats. I'd usually voted for the Liberal Democrats, but I truly thought the best way to bring about sort of economic, sane policies was through the Liberal Party. But no, I saw David Limbrick, the Victorian MLC, on the Outsiders program on Sky once, and I rang up the Liberal Democrats 5 minutes later. I said, okay, look, I want to get in on this. I think you guys are the best political party in Australia, and I want to invest my political energy into the Liberal Democrats.
Even though throughout your time as a Liberal Party reform advocate, you're often seen on the side of conservatives such as Tony Abbott and the late Jim Molan, but you've always had quite libertarian views. I remember, this is years back, it was Sky News discussion about drug decriminalisation or legalisation, and you were in favour, and James Morrow, one of the outsiders, was wanting to basically keep on the drug war.
Yes, no, I remember that interview. I'm pleased you remember it, Tim. Now, look, I think I've always been libertarian. I read Atlas Shrugged very carefully and very slowly. It's a big book. It took me a long time, and
same here.
This is Ayn Rand's magnum opus, and I was, I was absolutely enthralled by it, and I thought she was brilliant, and so I was very much always on the you're right. Factionally, I was associated with the right wing, and look, right-wing conservatives and libertarians do have a lot of overlap. There are differences, particularly about how much reach the government should have in terms of, whether people want to smoke cannabis. And I think the big difference between the Liberal Party and the Liberal Democrats, between a Conservative Party and a Libertarian Party, I think something that is of high importance and which we starkly differ is on war. Now, the Liberal Party basically never hesitates to sign up for a war, okay, and that's just part of their tradition, and they lionize people who've gone to war. Now, the Liberal Democrats believe that a lot of people who've gone to war are individually heroes, but often victims, and we think that most wars in history could have and should have been prevented. And we look at someone like Ronald Reagan, and Donald Trump, the two presidents that we were told before they came into office would start world wars, but in fact they wanted to sort of negotiate and sit down and talk to their enemies and sort of say, look, how can we sort of avoid a conflict here? This is the right thing to do, and I am quite alarmed about the never-ending military build-up in the Asia Pacific. And now I don't claim to have the answers there. I'm very skeptical of of NATO's intentions with the Ukraine war. I think the people in the Liberal Party just automatically think, look, if there's a war on, we've got to fight it. Okay, and I think that is wrong.
It's certainly more a division in the United States, the libertarian, because the US is the world's greatest military superpower, though China is catching up. So it's much more present, the divide on war between conservatives and libertarians. But you're absolutely right, though. in Australia, it's on foreign policy and national defence. It's most of the time been the uni party.
Yes. Yes, and now we've got, Anthony Albanese has probably marched in every anti-war protest there was. But now he's like, it's like Barack Obama was anti-war. And they get into the top job, even the lefties, Julia Gillard, they sign up for all this. And I'm starting to think the country that's got the best government in the world, Tim, is actually Switzerland. Switzerland, is not a libertarian utopia, but it is definitely the most libertarian country on earth, and most pertinently around war. Now they don't do war, and so people just leave them alone. There was mountains of bodies piled up in World War I, a very pointless war. Politicians just stumbled into that stupid war. 20 million dead. So there's armies raging all over Europe, back and forth across Europe. Everyone just leaves Switzerland alone. Everyone just knew, Switzerland's a neutral, so we won't attack them. World War II comes along. The Nazis are rampaging everywhere. They just leave Switzerland alone as well. And, and in the Cold War, the Soviets didn't try to destabilize Switzerland. They just thought, okay, well, Switzerland's neutral, so, no problem. Now, so while they don't do that, it's not like Switzerland doesn't care about the rest of the world. It's not like they're not humane. They did start a little organization called the Red Cross about 150 years ago. Now, this was not the Swiss government. This was private Swiss individuals. And the Red Cross has probably, it's probably been the greatest charity in the last 200 years. Comes out of the Christian tradition. And, I think they've got about 17 million volunteers right now helping people, in war-torn situations. So I think I think the world, and I think Australia, has got a lot to learn from Switzerland.
War is also expensive to us, the taxpayers, not just obviously war a threat to life and liberty. So far we've mentioned the never-ending war on drugs, and then there was the war on terror for however long now. It's it seems to be the forever war in Ukraine, and we've just come out of the war on COVID. Which the World Health Organization has just said that the emergency is over. So is the Biden administration, and it seems that there's a lot of revisionism going on, and a lot of trying to erase what our leaders did to us. And I remember one of the ways you sort of introduced yourself as a Liberal Democrat was taking part in the Sydney anti-lockdown protest. You described it as the most peaceful rally that you'd been to, and I think that's why they had to invent violence at that rally. But I'm a Victorian. I lived through the 6 lockdowns. It was enough to almost crush all your hope, like just in life.
Well, the media went completely crazy. It was really media-driven hysteria, and the politicians followed the media, and then the bureaucrats followed the politicians. Of course, the big pharmaceutical industry was pumping it up as well. And but out of all the American media organizations which went the most hysterical, the most berserk about COVID was The Atlantic. And The Atlantic had an article a few months ago saying, look, we need a COVID amnesty. Yes, mistakes were made, but we were doing our best and we had limited information. Okay. Well, I say, no. We don't want a COVID amnesty. We want a COVID justice. Now, that is important for 2 reasons in particular. The first is that while we may just want to sweep it under the carpet, we can't, because we've got massive government debt that's going to bog down this country for another decade or 2. So we can't just, if we could sweep the big debt under the carpet and it disappeared, well, maybe we could think about an amnesty. But more importantly, the worst part of COVID, worse than the deaths, and we know it was a bad flu. Again, these things happen randomly from time to time. But the worst part about it was the precedent it set about what government can do in terms of pushing us around, pushing the citizens around, and now the government knows that there won't be that much pushback. Now, there was some pushback by heroic individuals, but Dan Andrews got re-elected pretty comfortably. I'm not an election denier. I believe that was the will of the people. And I know that people criticise Dan Andrews, the opposition leader, Matthew Guy. Now, I know he's weak. I know he's pretty useless, but I mean, he's not terrible. And really, who cares? As long it didn't really matter who he was. It was a referendum, an up or down on Dan Andrews. Now, the truth is that, a clear majority of Victorians say, oh, no, we want more of him. Okay. So that's a bit of a problem. Now, we have set this precedent, and there will be an element in the government, in the deep state, in the bureaucracy, in the political offices, who got a real rush out of it, a real rush out of locking us all down and exercising all that brutal power. And I'm not going to say they're going to do it again about a virus, but they'll find some other excuse to do it again. Because this is the golden rule of power is this. If there is an opportunity to use power, if the opportunity exists, someone will take that opportunity at some point. It's just a matter of time. They will use it. And so now they know that, wow, we can push the people around and they'll basically go along with it. So that's the worst part, and that's why we need COVID justice.
Well, the politicians, they always deflected saying it's the health advice. Now, even though there's been a change of government in New South Wales, someone who's been re-elected or reappointed unopposed since 2008 is the Chief Health Officer, Kerry Chant. She is still there. She, in her published advice, wanted Berejiklian to go even harder at the time.
Yes. Well, that's right. Well, I mean, Kerry Chant made a lot of errors. Okay. I mean, the lockdowns clearly did prevent transmission. Obviously, if you're going to lock down the citizens, you're not going to be able to entirely prevent it, but it will prevent transmissions. But in fact, it will only delay transmissions because they can't lock us down forever.
Yeah, that's what we learned. It just kept coming back in.
That's right. So the lockdowns were just absolutely pointless. They were brutal, they were inhumane, and absolutely pointless. Now then, of course, the masks were garbage.
Yeah, the science is coming back on the masks now that actually they did nothing.
The New York Times wrote an article 3 months ago saying, look, we've reviewed every peer-reviewed article on the masks here. They don't do a thing. Now, surprise, surprise, you've got this stupid little mask on. Air can get around the corners of the masks. And the little COVID virus just waltzes all the way through the little pores in the mask. Okay, so the masks were complete garbage. Now, I know you're on YouTube, and I know we have to be careful about the vaccine.
Yes.
Okay. But I will say that
for that,
I think we can say that there is debate about whether they were effective. Okay, so hopefully that will be acceptable to the censors. So what did it all achieve? Now, Kerry Chant was part of all of these decisions, and I'm glad she's still in the role. I'm hoping at some point we can have some type of a parliamentary inquiry, and we can sort of quiz her on the many errors that she made.
Now, it shouldn't be described a health response. It was a police state response. It's looking like that the New South Wales government the New South Wales police didn't issue any lawful fines. The New South Wales Supreme Court already knocked out a whole bunch of fines, I think at the end of last year, and now they've suspended the payment or demand for payment of any outstanding fines, which is cold comfort to those who have already paid them, or some people might say suckers who already paid them, or some already worked them off, or had to took part in work orders to pay off the debt there. But it looks like that the strategy of just not paying seems to have been the right one if they've suspended it.
Well, that's right. Now, so the fact that they are walking away from these unpaid fines tells us that they're basically admitting that the people who have been fined did nothing wrong. Okay, so we had a very big, just as in July 2021, we had a very big illegal protest here in Sydney. This was when we were sort of a couple of weeks into a big, long, extended lockdown. And it was an enormous amount of fun, that demonstration. And there was tens of thousands of people there. And, you know, all the geniuses in the media and the political class were absolutely convinced that that event would be a COVID super spreader. And then what happened was they have their daily, press briefing. And, the journalists are just asking Kerry Chowton and Gladys Berejiklian, how many people got COVID today who attended the rally? How many is it related to? On the first day, they say, oh, well, we haven't got any evidence yet, but we're sure it was a super spreader. We're sure it's a super spreader. Went on for about 3 weeks. Every day they said, how many people at the rally have now been diagnosed? They were getting 1,000 people, 2,000 people a day with COVID across Sydney and New South Wales. But then they would say, well, how many people at the event got it? And they kept having to say, oh, well, nobody yet. This is after 3 weeks, okay? And people like me are just laughing at them because we knew COVID didn't spread outside. And how did we knew that? Is it because we've all got PhDs in, the study of viruses? No, it's simply because we could read the English language. I read in the New York Times in early July, the New York Times, that left-wing cooker magazine, right-wing cooker magazine, it came out and it said, wow, this is a surprise. This is in early July 2020. New York Times said, no one's caught COVID outside in the whole world. People are catching it inside. So all these instructions to go and, stay at home, not go for a walk in the park, not go to the beach, they were the best things you could have possibly done, of course. In July 2021, Channel 9 News, 6 o'clock Channel 9 News, they had this report. They said, oh, this is interesting. New South Wales Health today confirmed no one's caught COVID in an outdoors environment. And that got a bit of got a bit of interest on Twitter. Then the next day, same Channel 9 News, they came out and they said, gee, well, this data holds for the whole of Australia. No one's catching COVID outside. Okay, even though they'd force us to go and live inside. Okay, so they got everything wrong. They didn't get anything right about COVID. Now I truly believe that the whole thing, I don't believe it was pre-organized. Okay, now a lot of people on my Twitter feed say, it was a plandemic. Now, I don't think that's the case. I don't entirely rule it out, but I'd give it a 10% chance, I suppose. That's because it's too difficult to organize something this big. Okay, it's too difficult. It's got to have come from an environment where it was going to, all the ingredients for the bushfire were there. Now, I think what it was is, this was 3 years into the presidency of Donald Trump. The left had just gone bananas about Trump. They had lost their mind about Trump. Okay, every 3 days there's a new mega scandal, even though I thought Trump was a very good president. And so they lost their mind. They tried to impeach him over nothing, over Joe Biden being exposed as a crook in Ukraine and his son. And then early February, first week of February 2020, the impeachment fails, always going to do. They're all brokenhearted. They're desperate to remove Trump. They're in the middle of the Democratic primary. And, they've got Bernie the communist. They've got, Mitt. They've got Pocahontas. And they've got Joe Biden, geriatric Joe. And so they're in this panic. And the betting markets at this point are saying Trump was clearly the odds-on favourite to get re-elected. And then what happens? A bad flu pops along. Okay, and then they just thought, and at first, Trump was calling it the China virus. So the Democrats at first, Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer, were saying, oh, Trump's being a racist, blah, blah, blah. But then they quickly worked out, they thought, look, there's political gold here. If we can make a virus 20 times bigger than it really is, that's all correct. You create the hysteria about it. And it threw Trump off balance. And the whole world went crazy like we've never seen, at least since World War II. The whole world went completely bonkers, driven by the people that hated Trump. Just an amazing coincidence that the more you hated Trump, the more you cheered on COVID hysteria. And, Trump wasn't immune to the hysteria. And so, he sort of, I think, it was very hard for anybody to resist it. And a few wise people did. And so, then of course, what that delivered was the hysteria in the end delivered the big knockout blow, which was the mail out ballots. Okay, so as you know, Tim, 70% of Americans or 30% of American voters don't vote in an election. That's an optional vote. They don't want to vote. Good on them. But then everybody gets posted a ballot paper, and I believe Dinesh D'Souza's account, 2,000 mules, I think it's very accurate. I think that there was a massive
we also have
campaign.
to be careful about talking about the 2020 election result on YouTube as well.
Okay, thanks for pointing. It did cross my mind. I might be saying thank you. Okay, well, let's move on. I don't want to get your show in any trouble, Tim.
I certainly think that they used the emergence of the virus. That was, well, the whole response was political. But if you're going to plan the release of a virus, at least pick one that's much more super deadly than COVID is. It was just basically a novel flu. And obviously, you alluded to the jabs. It was mentioned, I think, mainly by Ben Fordham on 2GB before the election that the New South Wales government still had vaccine mandates, and Dom Perrottet, he constantly just said, like, oh, I want to get rid of them all, but there's nothing really I can do to direct these bureaucrats. I mean, he was the premier.
Well, that was an appalling admission. It was a frightening admission. You would have thought that the elected premier of the executive government would have the power to end the COVID vaccine mandates. But no, my understanding is that they're still in place for several industries. And at this point, Tim, it's only about one thing, and that's malice. Malice towards the people who had the courage to take a stand against the irrationality. It's clearly not, concerned about anybody's health. It's about revenge and malice, and it's absolutely appalling.
Now, your path to being the lead Liberal Democrats candidate for the New South Wales election, you were the lead Senate candidate at the past federal election. In fact, you were going to be the candidate for Warringah, but they liked you so much they promoted you to the lead Senate candidate. So you were endorsed at the beginning of 2023 as the lead Liberal Democrat Senate upper house candidate for New South Wales, but then there was the state executive decided that for some reason you weren't libertarian enough, and then there was a membership rise up at a special general meeting, and you were re-endorsed a second time.
Yes, well, Tim, I'm always impressed with your knowledge, but you did make an error there. They didn't disendorse me because I was too libertarian. They disendorsed me because they wanted to run a vague campaign. So what happened was we had the Senate election in May 2022. And the biggest news out of that federal election was that Labor had won, obviously. Second biggest story was the success of the Teals, which just campaigned on vague centrism, dressing up their left-wing agenda. But that's, and it was impressive what they did, took six seats out of the heart of the Liberal Party's heartland, so politically, impressive. Now then, only a couple of months after that, we had a democratic vote of the membership to decide who would be our upper house candidate for this recent state election. The party always knew we were in with a reasonably good shot. So whoever our candidate was had a 50-50 chance of winning. That was sort of the consensus view. And we had that view because David Leyonhjelm 4 years ago came very, very close to winning. So that's why we thought, and we thought that the parties probably got a little bit more public awareness after the Senate campaign. So we thought we were in with a good shot. So we had the campaign in September last year. Now, early September. Now, I was actually hoping to get our party's founder, Dr. John Humphreys, to be our candidate, or Ross Cameron. I was hoping that he might be our candidate. But when we couldn't persuade them to run, I said to myself, look, I will run, if I can sort of campaign on a bold libertarian agenda. So I stood before the members and I said, look, this is not something that I'm lusting for. I'm happy to be the candidate, but I really want you to know that I want to run on a more purist libertarian vision. And the party membership said, by about almost 70% said, yes, well, we want you to be our candidate on that agenda. Now, then we had there's a 7-member state executive. And now the problem with libertarians and state executives or party executives is that it's against the libertarian instinct to want to be on an executive. Okay, so unfortunately, we have a lack of people who want to be on it. But we had this 7 members on the executive, of which now I believe they had good intentions. They believed that they were doing the right thing by the party, but we were at loggerheads almost immediately because they thought, no, John, we need to copy the success of the Teals. We need to talk about vague terms. They wanted us to campaign on things like prosperity, community, and fairness. They wanted them to be our 3 slogans. And I thought, well, look, this is the exact opposite. I said the Teals are campaigning to win 51% of the lower house seat. We're hoping to get 3 or 4%. And to reach the 3 or 4%, we need a purist message. So the campaign was really at an impasse that went on for several months. Then on Boxing Day, the state executive made a poor mistake, a bad strategic mistake in disendorsing me on a 4-3 vote. And they only put my disendorsement on the agenda on Boxing Day 1 minute before the meeting began. So I think they had thought, well, we'll disendorse him. And since it's how quiet Christmas is, between Christmas and New Year, Australia is very, basically shut down. They thought, we'll get away with it. Well, while the Libertarians can be criticised for being unwilling to be on a state executive, when there is a tyrannical tyranny that needs to be overthrown, they did rise up, really quickly. And I thought it would take them about a week we needed 25% of the New South Wales membership to sign a petition to call a special general meeting to replace the state executive or to have a fresh election for the state executive. So we got that 25% in 24 hours, which was just fabulous. And then then the party rules said that we had to wait 28 days until we could have the special general meeting. So we then had the special general meeting on the 28th of January. And then, the party membership on that occasion completely threw out all the members of the previous executive, except for all those who had opposed me. One of them got re-elected, and we got a supportive executive elected. And David Lionhelm decided to nominate for the position, and the party membership on that occasion endorsed me by 77%. So that was a good result, but we had wasted months. We then only had 7 weeks to campaign. The party was exhausted after what we call the Civil War, and even our supporters were saying, they didn't really want to volunteer or donate money because they just thought, look, just after this debacle, we can't win. So we had a very small time frame and very few resources, but we had some very smart people around us, and we made a couple of good strategic decisions, and we ended up getting a lot more votes than we needed to get elected.
The process you just described to get for the membership to to elect a new executive so you could be re-endorsed as the candidate, it sounds a much simpler process than the New South Wales pre-selection process and that state executive, which you would be familiar with. You appeared in a Four Corners episode post the federal election, which, like, I've read the books post the election, Nikki Savva's book, and I still don't understand like any of the New South Wales Liberal processes and how they're in this paralysis.
Oh, well, look, it's not that complicated, so I'm happy to share it with you and your viewers. The New South Wales Liberal Party has been the most factionally dominated division of any Liberal or Labor Party in the country for about 30 years. The New South Wales Labor Party used to be, pretty bad as well, but that's sort of settled down now. So we had these, and when we say factional, we're talking about, basically, mafia-like gangs. Okay, no interest in the welfare of the country or the welfare of the party, just trying to extract whatever they can out of the Liberal Party. And so myself and others, a good 10 years ago, 12 years ago, started a campaign to bring about democratic reform of the pre-selection process. Now, that was one hell of a battle that went on for about 7 years. But in 2018, the party's rules were changed. The party's rules said that we will select candidates for state and federal elections via a plebiscite of the local members. Okay, and this was terrific. We thought, great, the bad old days are behind us. But they snuck in a little clause when the party, because the party membership wanted this reform in a big way. But the baddies stuck in a clause saying, oh, well, look, we're not going to, these reforms will come into power, but not until after the next state and federal elections. Well, okay. We've waited long enough. We can wait a little bit longer. So we had a state and federal election in 2019. The New South Wales Liberal Party did. So therefore, it was meant to be for the recent state and federal elections in the Liberal Party. They were meant to be all conducted via a democratic process. But, Scott Morrison just couldn't help himself. He wanted his mates in Parliament, and he insisted on captain's calls. And that's when that was big news. Okay, it was it's not often factional stuff makes the 6 o'clock commercial news. It did for 2 months. Now and it was big on the Sydney Morning Herald. Okay, it was making news all around the country. ScoMo in a factional war, and it went to the High Court. There was legal battle after legal battle. Now, what up and prior to then, ScoMo's polling was even with Albo. His polling had been quite high during the quote-unquote pandemic. But, 4 months out from the election, the news poll, Albo might have had a 51-52 lead, but ScoMo was very competitive, being an incumbent at 49-48. But when that factional brawl exploded all over the media, even though most people didn't quite understand the details, they got the gist of it, which was ScoMo doesn't want the party members to choose the candidates because he wants to do the choosing. And they just thought, people out there in marginal seat Australia just thought, that stinks, ScoMo. And that's when it was during that period that ScoMo's polling fell off a cliff. And now I'm not saying ScoMo would have won had that not happened. And it could be a coincidence, but I think it did hurt him. And I think it also helped the Teals. A lot of people in Liberal seats thought, I really can't vote for ScoMo. And I think that was a factor. Now, then you would think with the state with that being an absolute disaster for the party in so many ways, we then have the state election, the Liberal Party, not my party, the Liberal Democrats, but the Liberal Party then had a state election coming up. Dom Perrottet, who had been in the early days of the plebiscite push, very keen supporter. And he addressed the State Council of the New South Wales Liberal Party, and he said, we're definitely having democratic pre-selections in the lead up to the state election. And then, once again, they get closer and closer. They just tried to wear down the clock. They sort of delay. Then say, oh, look, the state election's upon us. We're just going to do some more appointments. So very, and then they lost as well. Okay, so this is why I think, that the Liberal Party is finished. Okay, they have had, because of the lack of democratic pre-selections, it's look, it's been a very successful political party. Okay, so, it's one of, arguably the most successful electorally since World War II in the Western world. Okay, now in most countries like the US, the UK, the battle between the left and the right is usually 50-50. 50-50, the Democrats or Republicans control the White House, and it's 50-50 the Labor Party or the Conservatives control number 10 Downing Street. But in Australia, it's about sort of the Liberal Party's run the joint for about 75% of the time. This is very impressive. Okay, and but I think all that success has just sort of made it's hollowed it out. I sort of think of the Liberal Party as this grand old mansion. Looks good on the outside, but the foundations have been eaten away by termites. It just needs a little bit of a prod and the whole thing will just come falling down. I think that more than half of the people that vote for the Liberal Party are disappointed in the Liberal Party. Now, and they're probably sympathetic to a party like mine or the UAP or One Nation, but they think to themselves, oh, look, I like the Liberal Democrats, but I'll vote for the stupid coalition because I really don't want a Labor government. Now, you know, unfortunately, if they understood how preferential voting works, it wouldn't be an issue, but you can do both. You can, you know, but I think that there is just simply a lack of intellectual depth across the Liberal Party, and there's no white knight on the horizon. There's no one. I mean, like when Malcolm Turnbull was the opposition leader 15 years ago, people like me would have been saying, oh, well, you know, there's still hope for the party. Tony Abbott might become the Prime Minister one day. Well, that's what happened. You know, and then Tony tried to do a few good things and they rolled him, okay, because the polling got tough.
What the Liberal Party says on its website is good, which is what you're referring to. But as you're describing, the decline in the Liberal Party is now in the getting in the low 30s, which is unthinkable, which is why you've joined the Liberal Democrats. So did your longtime friend Ross Cameron, who's the New South Wales state president. So there's a lot who are making the switch.
Yes, well, look, we had a celebratory party last week, and you know, we had about 300 people turn up, and there was, you know, quite a few Liberal Party people turning up just to sort of check us out, get to know the Liberal Democrats. I'm very hopeful. We've got 8 years in the upper house, the New South Wales upper house. It's a good platform to try and build a movement. Okay, now many people in the Liberal Democrats say that we should not aim for government. We should aim to replicate what the Greens have done on the left, which is to become a 10% party, which will often give us balance of power. But even more important than that, the Greens have been very successful in the last 30 years in dragging the Labor Party to the left. The Labor Party knows that if it goes right, too far right, then the Greens can win lower house seats off them. Okay, and Labor doesn't like the Greens, but they have to work together. Okay, now, we would like to, well, many people in my party, the Liberal Democrats, think we should aim to be a 10% purist party, criticise the coalition for when they go cowardly, like they usually are at the moment, and yeah, and get a few senators in, get a few members of upper houses in around the place, and try and become a purist party. Now, other people say that any political party should always be aiming for government. Some people in the Liberal Democrats say about that argument, they say, look, let's say we won, you know, 55% of the vote nationwide. They say, well, then all that automatically happens is spivs and opportunists get magnetized. They get drawn like a moth to the flame to that success. And the spivs and the opportunists come in who don't have policy conviction, and they'll just sort of make it another Liberal Party. Now, they may well be right about that.
I agree that it's best to be a purist party if that's the strategy, to have the influence to replicate the influence that the Greens have had on Labor governments, which is why the Freedom Manifesto, which you did campaign on, is so important. I mean, it's all there. Freedom from COVID alarmism, we've already spoken about that. Recall elections, would that have to be in the Australian Constitution? I know it's a thing in the United States where you can recall the governor or a district attorney or a police chief or everything.
Look, recall elections are, I think they've got them in Switzerland as well. recall elections is just a more advanced form of democracy. It's not complicated. It means that, in the United States, you typically need sort of something like, 5% of an electorate to sign a petition saying that you want a new election for your member of Congress or governor or whatever it may be. Now, 5% doesn't sound like much, but the truth is it's a huge effort to get 5% of, let's say it's a federal seat in Australia. It's a lot of people. You'd need sort of about, 8,000 people to sign a petition. Now, maybe we need the threshold. We don't want frivolous recalls, but the United States doesn't really have frivolous recalls. Now, and a recall can also backfire badly. Now, in the state of California, they had a very bad governor 20 years ago, and he got recalled, and the people of California elected a Republican, Arnold Schwarzenegger, who was, pretty good governor, for California, I suppose. He's got worse. But then they had a recall last year in California again against Gavin Newsom. And Gavin Newsom not only got re-elected, he got re-elected with a bigger majority. And that has now so the risk with a recall is strengthening a political figure that you don't like. And that's precisely what's happened with Gavin Newsom. I think there is still a reasonable chance that Joe Biden is not the candidate for president in 2024. Could be health concerns, could be a whole lot of things. Hunter's in trouble. And I think if Biden, I know he's officially the candidate, and he's, the betting markets say he's going to be the candidate, but I mean, he's an old man. And so if he does fall over, I think that the Democrats will then choose Gavin Newsom to be the candidate. So that recall election backfired. Now, recall elections would not be used often, and ideally they would never be used. But having them on the books acts as a way to keep politicians in check.
Well, especially if there's long-term governments which are past their use-by date. I mean, the last 4 years of the last New South Wales Labor government, when it was Yema, Rees, Keneally, that just seemed that shit show seemed to go on forever until the 2011 state election when they got thrown out.
Oh, well, that's a very good example, Tim. That government would have got recalled. That's what would have happened, and that would have been a good thing. Okay, and now we didn't do it because fixed terms, locked in. Now, if we had a recall election, would we have got 5% of New South Wales to sign a petition saying they want a fresh election? We would have got 20%. Okay, would have been, and they would have lost. So that is a very good example. Now, now there was times when Albanese wasn't, Morrison was not popular, and Rudd was not popular. I don't think they would have been recalled. We don't want to recall a government just because they're down in the polls. But, that previous Labor government, had a lot of problems with ICAC, etc. And they got absolutely thrown out, at the election. The truth is we should have had the election about 3 years earlier, and we would have under a recall option.
We'll go through the rest of the manifesto. So debt and deficit. So immediate 10% cut in government spending. I mean, there's lots of fat in the government budgets, which I don't think the federal budget on Tuesday will cut that much. Low taxes. So this is the Liberal Democrats have always supported a flat rate of tax and an increased tax-free threshold. Voluntary superannuation, which is a lot of your super goes to pay the salaries of all the ex-unionists who are on the board of industry super funds.
Yes.
And cutting red tape for small business. Well, that's even more needed now after government smashed them during COVID. A cheap and reliable energy, something we desperately need at the moment. Decentralized education. Now, a lot of our audience might not have heard of the school voucher system, because schools seem to have become the cultural Marxists, they have control of them, and so they use them to shape the children. But in a school, explain why a school voucher system would end the education culture wars.
Well, school vouchers is a policy that I'm very excited about, and I'm hoping to, use the time in Parliament to sort of promote this agenda. Now, very few people in Australia understand what a school voucher is, so it's not complicated. It simply means at the beginning of every year, the parents of school-aged children get a voucher from the government, which will be like a certificate. And that certificate will have a face value on it of, I'm guessing, $7,000. And then the parents then can take that certificate to any school they want to get their child educated. So there wouldn't be any national curriculum or anything. We wouldn't really need a Department of Education bureaucracy. We would basically, there'd be a little bit of bureaucracy to manage the distribution of the vouchers. There wouldn't be too much more than that. Now, it's based on the premise that we want to put the spirit of private enterprise, free enterprise, into the education system. These people are going to be able to set up schools, and they're going to compete for that voucher. If they get that voucher, the school then gets $7,000, whatever it may be worth. Now, there would be a very large variety of schools under this structure. Some people would prefer to just go to the standard school that would not be too different to today, and that's fine if that's what the parents have chosen. Parents would be able to use it for homeschooling. There might be a religious school. There might be a lot of kids are interested in business when they're younger, and they might be a school that's sort of going to steer them in a business career. It might be one focused on arts, music, sports, whatever. Okay, and there will be a small percentage, I reckon 2% of parents will want to send their kids to a school where they'll learn about, James Cook is the worst person, before Adolf Hitler, and let's talk about rainbow, dream time all day, every day, and global warming. No problem. If the parents want to send them to that school, then that's fine. Now, we believe that 98% of parents wouldn't, but that's also fine. So we're not actually trying to dictate what the curriculum's going to be. We're going to be putting that decision in the hands of the people that care for their kids the most, which is the parents. Parents, all humans, even people that sort of end up going to jail, all humans have this very natural overriding love for their children. And so they're going to want to care for their children more than anything else. And now there will be wealthier people will be able to top up the voucher. They might say, well, I'd like to, contribute more money to my school, and that's fine too. The value of the school voucher would be one that would give all kids, even kids from a poor background, it would give them the ability to access a decent education. Now, this revolution is happening in the United States right now. Not many people in Australia know about it, but Adam Crichton in The Australian has written about it once or twice. And there's a fellow called Corey DeAngelis who is worth following on Twitter. He's like the school voucher evangelist in the United States. And there are things that it is happening quickly. And the interesting thing is Milton Friedman first proposed this concept in the 1950s, the great Milton Friedman, and not one state in the US adopted it. So even during the Reagan era and the Gingrich Revolution and everything, no school adopted school vouchers. But they're embracing it very rapidly right now in the US. Now, why is that? Well, that was because a little thing called COVID came along, and the parents were stuck at home and they saw what their kids had been taught, and they said, I don't like this garbage. And the school vouchers thing is happening, and I want it to happen in Australia.
And we'll go keep going down the list. Free speech. There's constant legislation that is before all parliaments, state and federal, restricting free speech. I know the latest that all states are passing laws against displaying certain symbols and hand gestures, but what should I think most the most alarming example that we've seen in the past week about how laws against free speech can be weaponized is what's happening to your new colleague in the Legislative Council, Mark Latham. So Alex Greenwich is wanting to report him to the police for using a carriage service to menace and harass, which is a federal offence. And New South Wales, they have a homosexual vilification law, so he's going to take him to the one of your tribunals, and then also sue for defamation as well. Like, that's just a high profile example of all the anti-free speech laws that are already in existence, and then there's more that are always proposed.
Well, look, the important thing that needs to be said is that free speech is tough, okay, because there will always be people that some other people want to ban them expressing their ideas. And we really, if to be a truly liberal democratic society, we simply have to robustly defend people to say things that we disagree with. Now, I remember this sort of, in the 1990s, there was the Holocaust denier, David Irving, who wanted to get a visa to come to Australia. And the Labor government denied him a visa. They said, no, his views are too repugnant. Well, I agree his views are too repugnant. But that sort of opened the door to saying, oh, well, look, yes, free speech is all good and everything. And yes, we've got to be, give it a fairly wide berth. But for something really extreme, surely we can ban that. And when you open that door, it then just keeps opening and opening and opening until they get to the point now where, that free speech genuinely seems to be under attack. So I think that we should, it's such an important thing. It's really when the US founding fathers amended their constitution, the very first amendment in that Bill of Rights that they put up there was the right to free speech as an absolute. And I think that it is we are imperiling ourselves if we don't resolutely stand by that sacred principle.
Because if you start banning some speech, then it just becomes if you're going to ban this speech, then why not this one? Because some people find this offensive. It's either all of it is all speech is permitted, or only the approved government speech is, which is what you had in Soviet Russia. You still have in communist China.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, I'm listening to this quite interesting podcast at the moment. There was this group in the 1930s and 40s in this country who were a small little group of intellectuals, and half of them had been communists in the 1920s, but then they swung violently or radically to the hard right, and they ended up becoming very pro-imperial Japan and pro the Nazis and anti the British Empire. And when World War II started, it wasn't a large organisation, but they were well known. It was called the Australia First or something, and the Australia First Movement. And they were cheering on a Japanese invasion. Okay, now they weren't like thugs; they were sort of intellectuals. But anyway, they were pretty crazy. This is while we're getting bombed by Imperial Japan. And now they ended up getting arrested, or about 24 of them got arrested. Interned. Okay. Now, after about a year of them being arrested, there was this sort of uprising in public sympathy for them, and nobody was agreeing with them. We were starting to learn the true horrors of what the Imperial Japanese had done. And opposition leader Robert Menzies said, look, I think we need to release these people, and I think we probably need to give them some compensation, because he said, look, they were exercising their free speech. Okay. And then the Labor government agreed, and they did release them, and quite a few of them got compensation. And when I was listening to this podcast about these, nutters. I don't think they were dangerous, but they probably had dangerous ideas. But the interesting thing is, back then, even in the middle of a war, where we've got a country genuinely invading us, our political figures, leaders across the spectrum, were really so committed to this principle of free speech that they released them and gave them compensation. And an apology from the government. Say, look, you didn't actually commit any crimes. We just didn't like what you were saying, and we now feel bad about that. And I just think, gee, we've fallen a long way since then.
Yes, I can't imagine anything like that happening today. Now, the final point on Liberal Democrats' Freedom Manifesto is freedom from surveillance. Now, we have the federal government wanting to create the single government ID in New South Wales, the big Boheathum. I've probably mispronounced that right, is Service New South Wales, which I think the rest of Australia has heard of because all of the COVID contact tracing was centralized in that app.
Yeah, well, this is like one of the very bad hangover effects of COVID is that we've just marched straight into these COVID apps, which didn't achieve anything, of course, and all this centralized government testing. They're now merging it into let's just have the government sort of know everything about you. It's reminiscent of what the Chinese are doing with the social credit system. So it's and they just and the public seem to be going along with it. Now, when this digital ID comes out, which it looks like it's going to, most people will at first think this is so convenient.
Yes.
They'll think, well, what's the harm with this? But Ayn Rand taught us, the greatest freedom is the freedom to privacy. Okay, because we're not really free unless we've got privacy. Now, we do need to have a big part of our lives which is beyond the reach of the government. And that's what these digital ID things, which, they will want to convert it into monitoring our carbon footprint. That's the obvious direction in which it's going. And so it has to be resisted. And so, at the Liberal Democrats, 100% will be against all forms of digital ID and also cash. Now, I know that the criminal world likes cash. And if we banned cash, there would be less crime that's currently transacted through cash. But that is a small price to pay for citizens to still have, we're better off tolerating a little bit of crime, unfortunately, so that people can have economic freedom and economic privacy.
Well, there's another way to lessen organized crime than ban cash, and that's legalizing some of the things that they're peddling, which we sort of mentioned at the beginning of the show. But that is a one thing that's not on the Freedom Manifesto. But I know it's a Liberal Democrat value, is ending the nanny state. And we've had the federal government this week announce a huge nanny state policy crackdown, vaping, it's only allowed to be imported if you have a doctor's prescription, if you're quitting smoking, and it has to be in plain packaging. They're going to regulate the nicotine and flavors. And this seems to have come about because the public health lobby, particularly down here in Victoria, Brett Sutton and the CEO of Vic Health, Sandro Di Maio. This is the cracking down on eradicating the scourge of vaping. This is their new crusade now that COVID isn't scary. And, well, this is something that's going to lead to the organised crime that you just mentioned.
Yes, look, so I'm not a vapor, and I don't particularly, but most of my mates are. And I think that it's a wonderful little industry which has sprung up. Now, I think it's actually currently illegal, but it's not being enforced. So what's going to happen here is I think there's about 1.5 million vapers in this country, and they're now going to try and have it centrally planned by the government. So you've got to go and see the doctor, and there's going to be now. I think there's a debate about whether vaping is harmful now, or if it is harmful, about it may be quite.
There's lots of propaganda that says it is.
Yeah, well, look, I think everybody's agreed that even the anti-vaping crowd will say it's far less damaging than cigarettes. Okay, now then we've got the, but look, I mean, what would I know? Okay, I'm a humble history student, so I don't know, and I think vaping's still quite a new phenomenon, so we don't know what the long-term effects are. But even if, Tim, I knew that vaping was detrimental to people, I still would not want to ban it. Because even if you could justify the government banning this product, and if we knew for a fact that that was a net positive, well, then that's only going to justify the government going in and banning other things. They can't help themselves. We know Coca-Cola is not good for you, but we don't ban it. We know Big Mac is not good for you, but we don't ban it. Now, I am absolutely in favour of the anti-vaping lobby running a public awareness campaign and saying, don't vape, it's bad for you. I'm also in favour of the pro-vaping lobby running a campaign saying, vape, it's great, okay? And I don't think that the government should be involved in this. Now, I think we can have a battle of ideas and see what individual consumers want. And of course, if this thing goes ahead, I mean, they seem pretty fired up about it. If it goes ahead, there's going to be a whole new criminal industry is going to be invented overnight, thanks to government regulation.
Oh, the Australian Federal Police, they'll be a winner as well. They'll get to increase the increase budget, and they'll get to, what is that? They always post on social media when they've burnt some illegal tobacco, like, look how good we are. I mean, that's something through excessive taxes that the federal government's already created.
Yes, that's right. Well, 1 in 3, about a third, I heard the other day, 1 in 3 of drugs that come through our airports or through our borders anyway, a third of it gets caught, but 2/3 doesn't get caught. Okay, so that's what they're going to, with these vapes, people are either going to manufacture them in Australia or they'll get in here somehow. And it's going to be the first step that people, often teenagers, take into the criminal world. So they would be not criminals. They're leading a non-criminal lifestyle. The vaping law has made them take a little step into the criminal world. That's not good for their mental outlook. They know that they're outside the law. It might encourage them to continue to do things outside the law.
Now, how much of this Freedom Manifesto can you have an influence on as a New South Wales legislator? The upper house is, well, if you divide the house into a centre left block and a centre right block, it's deadlocked at 21 each, which is maybe why Chris Minns is trying to shoehorn the former Nationals Minister Ben Franklin to be the president, but that's just political shenanigans. I'm not sure what the legislative agenda Chris Minns is going to put forth. He wasn't really elected on much. He is a bit fiscally responsible, which is, I guess, and it's an improvement on our guy down here, Labor guy down here, Dan Andrews. What are you expecting to come before you in the Legislative Council?
Look, all around the world right now, the left is sort of at peak craziness. Okay, so I'm actually quite relieved that if it was time for New South Wales to have a Labor government, I'm relieved it's Chris Minns. He is far more Bob Carr than he is Dan Andrews. Okay, I was impressed with him during the campaign on more than one occasion when he criticised the Liberal government over its debt and over its unfunded spending. Since he's won office, I've also been impressed on 2 or 3 occasions where he's talked about cutting out government programs which are wasteful. the New South Wales government was previously giving out $100 vouchers to parents every year to buy sporting equipment. Well, sporting equipment's good, and we want parents to spend money on sporting equipment, but they can self-fund it. We don't want the government coming in and doing it. And then, of course, you've got to create a big bureaucracy and all the waste associated with, a government program. Okay, so look, so far, I'm, tentatively, reasonably happy with them. Now, I suspect I'm going to vote with the Liberal Party and the National Party more than the Labor Party. Okay, because, they're often better in opposition, the Liberal Party, than they are in government. So they'll probably stick to their principles more in opposition. I certainly hope they do. But so look, I'm hoping to use the platform to promote our agenda of a much smaller government. Through lower taxes, cutting spending, cutting regulation, and cutting debt, and having a thriving private sector, which will give us a more humane world.
Now, the Liberal Democrats going forward, at least at the federal level, won't be able to be called the Liberal Democrats. The Liberal Party for a long time hasn't liked that the party has Liberal in its name, and so Scott Morrison's government passed legislation that because they were the first registered Liberal Party, only they can be the Liberal Party. So the party, Lib Dems hand has been forced, and so you're going to have to at least change your name federally. So how is the party approaching it?
There's a meeting in Melbourne on this Saturday this week, our AGM. It's going to be a hot topic for discussion. So you're right, we do have to change it to the federal level. It looks like there could be a few by-elections around the corner, so we do need to change it at the federal level. And there's various names being suggested.
What are some that have been put forward?
Oh, well, there's the Libertarian Party, there's the Liberty and Democracy Party, there's the Liberty Democrats. So a few other combinations. I think the Low Tax Party, the Anti-Government Party. So I think we would prefer to try and have some similarity with the existing name. I believe we have built a little bit of equity, a reasonable amount of equity, in the party's brand. So that's why we want to keep something in it that sounds a little bit like the Liberal Democrats.
Well, it could still be, the party's website is ldp.org. So if it could be the same acronym, or if you could keep the same abbreviation, Lib Dems, like you could keep it with, say, Liberty and Democracy or Liberty Democrats.
Correct. That is right. Yes, yes.
Oh, thank you, John, so much for joining me tonight. You've got a busy week ahead of you with the swearing in. And is there a bit of, I don't know if the New South Wales Parliament has much pomp and ceremony with its opening. It's probably not as glamorous as the King's coronation we just saw. But looking forward to seeing you in action on the floor and in the committee as well. All the best with your political career.
Terrific, Tim. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Take care. All right, everybody, that's the show for tonight. Now, I'll be back tomorrow night with Tim's News Explosion, 8:30 p.m. Melbourne time on YouTube, D Live and Odyssey. There's a lot to get through. News south of the Murray here with the shit show that is the Victorian Liberal Party, and also the proposed law, even further laws that Dan Andrews has in mind to use against Victorians. We'll also catch up on the latest unrest in the United States and the outcome of the UK council elections. So I'll see you all then. Remember, if you don't want to send through super chats throughout the show, you can take out an Unshackled membership on the unshackled.net memberships, and there is bronze $5 per month, silver $10 per month, gold $25 per month, and platinum $50 per month. And remember, the unshackled.net is where you can see the Unshackled Productions archive and also our articles as well. There's more reports from Richard Wollstonecroft coming up as well, so stay tuned for those. Thank you everyone for your company once again. I hope you enjoyed our discussion with John Ruddick tonight. He's certainly going to make a great contribution to the New South Wales Parliament and to the people as well. I'll see you all tomorrow night. Stay safe, stay sane, stay free, stay happy, stay healthy, and stay warm as well. Good night, everybody.
Thanks for tuning in to WilmsFront. Visit timwilms.com to view the archive of episodes. And keep visiting theunshackled.net to view all our shows. And to keep up with the latest real news and analysis.